We like to acknowledge when we first come to an event to speak to our original nations and peoples that are the Kalapuya, which is here in this area. Many of you may know this. We just like to take a moment to acknowledge the original peoples of this Turtle Island altogether, which is what we now know as America. And just, thinking of, we just came from an event and at the Oregon Country Fair, and we had known a little bit about that land, but we were introduced to all of this archaeology, and they were talking about the Camas ovens, and it's just this whole historical site that's on that land there, and just thinking, how was this land before all of this was built around us? So we'll see a little bit more about that history in the documentary film. I feel very privileged and honored to be speaking with my father and working with him now. That it's been literally a 40-year journey, probably my whole entire life, that he began doing this research. And then in 1992, he started this global campaign and has worked very, very hard with many hours, and it's really amazing to see it now becoming a global movement where there's universities and conferences that are talking about the Doctrine of Discovery. A woman just came up and told me she heard about somebody talking about it in Washington and she had never heard of it before, and she's really excited to see the film. So the word is spreading, and the more that we can start to see what I like to say, or it's not a great thing, but it's the social, political, and ecological crisis that we're seeing in the world right now. It's so obvious, and it's like bright shining neon lights in our faces, and it's breaking our hearts open. This is a really hard time, and it's sometimes, we want to look away, but this is not a time to look away. It's a time to really pay attention and learn this deeper history so that we can start to come to a greater understanding of one another. And on an Indigenous level, we share that perspective. We don't often see that in history books. We don't often see that taught in the world. So that's why this information is quite new to many people. So I'm greatly honored that you're here. I really appreciate this great turnout. And I'm going to introduce my dad. This is Steven Newcomb, legal scholar, speaker, author, and he's traveled all around the world and been on world stages and done great things. And we just look forward to sharing with you this evening. And we'll talk a little bit more with the Q&A after the film. Here's my father, Steven Newcomb.
I wanted to thank the sponsors of this event and thank all of you for coming this evening. And I want to acknowledge the Kalapuya people, the Kalapuya Nation, on whose territory this building, this church, and this entire area, everything that is situated on their territory. And I think that's very important to have that honor and respect for every nation and people of this great Turtle Island and throughout this hemisphere. We have an opportunity in watching this movie to understand the underlying patterns that have been afflicting not only our nations and peoples, but ecological systems throughout the planet and affecting everyone at this time. We have the responsibility and the opportunity to come together on the basis of other types of patterns of reverence and respect and honor. And you'll hear Virgil Killstraight, my great friend and mentor, a very wonderful Oglala Lakota spiritual leader. You'll hear him discuss those ideas in the film toward the end. This is difficult to watch. There are aspects of it that are very challenging. I want to emphasize that we are not doing this to attack anyone's religious beliefs, unless there happens to be a belief in domination. But in terms of trying to attack Christians or something like that, that is not our objective. Our objective is to take the very specific types of information found in ancient Vatican documents from the 15th century that I've been able to study in Latin and English since 1989, and to express that information in this movie and explain how those patterns have devastated so many nations and peoples and have contributed to the kinds of dysfunction and patterning that we see that is not working. I also want to acknowledge friends and family, my sister Beverly and my niece Tanara, and it's just great to see them here. And I also want to acknowledge Mark Harris. It's an interesting thing, my wonderful friend John Garlinghouse, who passed on not that long ago, immediately after he had passed, I was going through some things in my house in Alpine, California, and happened to stumble upon a cassette of an interview that Mark had done. He interviewed Carol Logan, myself, and John Garlinghouse in 1992, and it was just quite amazing to hear that all the way back then we were discussing these issues. I also want to acknowledge Bob Tom, and a friend that, my gosh, we've known each other for as long as I've been doing, before I even started this work, I think, or at least I was at the University of Oregon planning to go into federal Indian law. We've had many, many wonderful conversations at that time. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start the movie, and I look forward to a quick Q&A, and there's so much to discuss, and I look forward to other opportunities to come back and do this again. So thank you very much for being here. When is she?
The Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code, directed by Dakota filmmaker Sheldon Wolfchild, reveals a hidden language code found in ancient Vatican documents that has been used against original nations and peoples for more than 5 centuries, long before the days of Christopher Columbus. Based on Steven Newcomb's book Pagans in the Promised Land, The Doctrine of Discovery tells the story of how a secret Vatican code of domination became the basis of the 1823 U.S. Supreme Court ruling Johnson versus McIntosh, which defined Indian land title as a mere right of occupancy, and the basis for the United States federal Indian law and policy system. Go to 38plus2productions.com for further information.
Ready? So in just a moment, we're going to open it up for Q&A. I also wanted to just share, I know it's a lot to take in, and I know that a lot of times people watch this film, and as I've shared this a couple of times here locally in Eugene, and my dad has toured the country and many places, and people often come up and say, how come I didn't know this before? This has really affected me deeply. What can I do? Or this has changed my life even. So I feel like, again, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, it's this awakening that's happening. We're all waking up with the things that are currently happening in society, politically and ecologically. And it's helping us to find common ground with this deeper understanding and really open our hearts in a new way. For me personally, I look to this film, and it's interesting being an Indigenous woman and having, my own background, and how does this affect me? It affects me deeply as well in so many ways. But looking at it also from growing up as a young person and being really deeply spiritual in my own Indigenous spirituality, I would say, and not having a lot of guidance on the level of knowing what that was for many years. Luckily, I've had a lot of great Indigenous elders here in this local community. Bob Tom was part of that community, and so that's been wonderful. I feel like lately I've also been seeking more mentorship, because I had been receiving a lot of visions and dreams and messages even about the types of things that we're seeing on the planet, and just feeling this deep sense of not knowing what I should do, or who am I supposed to talk to about these things. So I wanted to share one of the messages that I've received, and for a long time I didn't even know who I could tell. I didn't even tell my dad right away. It was really hard. But so I feel like this is a really good message for me to share with you tonight, because I think a lot of times people these days are feeling like they just have a sense of there's grief happening, a lot of grief, and what's going to happen, and the uncertainty of it all, and it's heavy. We want something more. We want to see, like, well, where's this light that's going to come in? I also feel strongly that there really is a lot of light coming in as we witness this darker history, this darker shadow, so that we can heal it. So this message, I feel, really speaks to that, and I feel like the message is literally from the ancestors or the ancient ones, or I'm not sure, but I write it down and I share it with you tonight, and I hope it's helpful to you. So it's called A New Direction. The time has come for us to take ourselves out of the chaos and go in our own direction. This is about following a different path, and there are some who will not like it, and many who will not understand at first. Yet this is an important first step in making the change. It is important to know in your heart that this is the path you want to follow, and that it is the strength you find within yourself. It is hard to go away from the pack and carve your own trail, but this is necessary for change to occur. When you do this, do so with your heart leading the way, and listen for your inner guidance to know what is true and what to leave behind. This is about finding what is essential and true and taking nothing else too seriously. There is much that can be left behind, and it will serve you in the long run. Once you find this place inside yourself, you will feel much lighter and find more strength and certainty. This is a good first step. There are some who will see that you are changing in this good way and notice right away that this is something they want for themselves too, and it will be a pattern to follow. This is also a necessary part of the process to have people learn the shedding of unwanted skin, to reach their inner strength. It is a beautiful process when people find this place together, for it is a sign of good changes coming. This small trickle will then start to become more, and people will come to see what is happening and how this is working. Some will be intrigued and excited, and others will be upset by the changes and want nothing to do with it. It is not for the others to decide for anyone what is right or wrong. It is only that they find the changes for themselves and accept them in. It will all work out for the best. This is also another good first step. Now once more, people come to this new way of being with lightness in their heart and a sense of renewal. This is when things truly begin to shift. This is when more and more people will begin to feel there is something happening, and the messages begin to spread, and more people will begin to wake up to what they felt was missing before. They will let go of past angers, hatreds, hurts, and sorrows and begin anew. This is a time of renewal and to celebrate that there is indeed a shift. This is a time of coming together and support and community, and people begin to see the error in their ways. This is a truly powerful time. Next, we see that people find it less and less appealing to be in a world with chaos or violence or fighting, and their hearts really open up in a new way. This is when things start to shift on a large scale, and people come together to make big changes. There is no tolerance for hate, bigotry, slaughtering, hunting for sport, racism, and all the isms and ignorant choices that come from fear in the world. Suddenly, there is a new ideal for coming together, and not about fighting the separateness. This is a new time of deep acceptance for differences and a realization of oneness on a bigger scale. I like that message a lot because I just feel it shares there's a path, there's something happening. And the more we can just find that common ground and do our own inner healing, knowing our own ancestors, all of our ancestors. And another part that I recognize as well is, for me, I look at the Domination code that has been revealed in this movie and through my father's work, and I look to even deeper into the history back in Europe to see the Domination code was very real and very apparent, and how women's oppression and the Inquisition and such similar horrible history happened there as well. And so we're all in this, we're all healing, and this is a time of us coming together so that we can save the planet and really just, like it says, come together in oneness. So I'm going to bring my dad up and we'll start some Q&A. He might have some final thoughts as well. And at the end we'll wrap it up because I really would like him to share his anthem, which is a really great thing as well. But we'd like to offer Q&A as well. But.
Yeah, that's my lyric. I don't rap, but I do have a lyric. But I want to thank the First United Methodist Church for providing this venue this evening. And I also wanted to acknowledge Sheldon Wolfchild. He directed this movie. It took us a lot of effort to figure out how to tell the story. It came together in a pretty non-linear manner. And of course, one of the voices you hear in the movie is Buffy St. Marie, the wonderful, incredible singer from the Cree Nation. And she was kind enough to do the narration, part of the narration in the movie. And I also want to acknowledge my friend Cheryl Campbell. She was here and I forgot to mention her earlier. I also wanted to say that that Chairman Gowdy and the Yakima Nation have been extremely proactive in supporting our efforts. And Chairman Gowdy is, he's about 40-something, early 40s. He's absolutely fearless. He's so wonderfully intelligent, he gets it, and he's doing tremendous things along with his council. And they sponsored the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians just a few weeks ago, and I was invited to co-present with Chairman Gowdy there in front of 26 different Native nations from the Pacific Northwest to take this on as a central focus of the ATNI conference. And there have been a number of others, the USET, United Southeastern Tribes, and it actually showed our movie at the opening of their annual gathering and used that to frame the discussions that were going to take place. It is moving, and of course we were able to be in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York prior to Pope Francis coming there on his tour a few years back, and that was kind of neat to be able to go and show this prior to him coming. So it was the anyway, so I did have an opportunity to meet with Pope Francis on May 4th of 2016 and gave him a copy of my book, and we met with the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace for 2.5 hours. That's a kind of a longer story, but the information in the movie, a lot of times we say, well, what do you think? I mean, there's so much heart in the movie. It's very devastating information to a great extent. But one of the things that's very critically important to understand is that this is not some abstract information. This is not just about, oh yeah, well, that was a bummer way back then. This is very, very contemporary. As we showed, in 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court is still using this. They have to use it because it's their cornerstone, so to speak. And then in 2014, as you saw, the Ninth Circuit Court acknowledged those two rulings, Johnson versus McIntosh and Tehitan, went back through that chain of, if you can call it logic, but the type of reasoning that they use. And of course, the Supreme Court had the opportunity to take that case on. They declined to do so. What was interesting, the Kumeyaay actually won the case with regard to the issue that they were putting forward, that got put forward because of a lawsuit by some 3 professors trying to prevent Kumeyaay ancestral remains from being handed over to the Kumeyaay people, and the professors, in attempting to prevent that from happening, actually put the Kumeyaay Nation in the lawsuit, which was kind of foolish on the attorney's part, because then the attorneys for the Kumeyaay bands were able to say, well, there's sovereign immunity for the Kumeyaay Nation and for the various bands of the Kumeyaay Nation. The Kumeyaay Cultural Repatriation Committee is an arm of an extension of those governments, and so forth. So therefore, the sovereign immunity carries over to the KCRC, and the Ninth Circuit Court agreed with that. So that was a major victory, but at the same time, this subtext, they felt, because it was the KCRC was very insistent to have Kumeyaay Nation, that phrase, put into the legal brief. Then when the Ninth Circuit got that, they're realizing, nation, turf, territory. This is political. So to prevent any quote-unquote damage from occurring, they stuck the Tehiton and Johnson B. McIntosh in there. So it's so nuanced and so detailed. But the other thing I wanted to say is that Shawna's work is wonderful, and I love seeing her up here able to open up and share the information that's coming through to her. And one of the things that was awesome is we went to the Oregon Eclipse Festival last summer, and one of the elders there, Pete Jackson from Salt River, Pima, he asked if Shawna would go ahead and co-present with him in one of the circles, which she did. And she could tell you this herself, but I wanted to relate it to you, that she asked how many people here in the circle, it was a pretty big circle, how many people have had some kind of intuition or sense of connection with spirit and that sort of thing, messages and so forth. And I'd say a majority of the people in the circle raised their hand. And then she said, how many of you have ever told anyone? Hardly anyone raised their hand. So that was a very important teaching, to realize that these things do come through for all of us. I think it's part of the human experience. And this suppression through the domination ideology and the patterns of domination and dehumanization, that fear factor, women being burned as witches and that sort of thing, this very terroristic means, right, of suppression. The whole idea of genocide is usually understood, I think almost always, as slaughtering people, as you go and you create a massacre, you kill those people off. But there are slow death methods of genocide, and that's what they used in the boarding schools. My great-grandfather, my grandfather were both at Haskell Boarding School of Domination. I call it the boarding school of domination rather than just the boarding school, because it sounds like some preppy thing if you say boarding school. But the suppression of the language and the women at Warm Springs who told me when I was a student here at U of O, I asked them about the boarding schools, and they said that their tongues, these two sisters, the Bernice and her sister, Bernice Mitchell, said that their tongues had been put on dry ice and the top layer of skin peeled off their tongue for speaking their language. That's horrific, but how many people in the society at large understand all of the ways in which these kinds of abuses, I think that's a mild term compared to what it was, how many people realize that has taken place? And then the scars, the lasting traumas that have to be worked through. So anyway, I just wanted to share a few of those things. There's so much more that I could state about all these things. The incredible teachings of Virgil Kilstrade and the Oglala Lakota Nation. Every single nation has something similar. When you think of the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of thousands and thousands of years extending back to the beginning of time through our oral histories and traditions, what was available for the people of Christendom to be able to learn from and to learn, and yet because of that supreme arrogance and hubris, coming here and just wantonly destroying that which they didn't even begin to understand, and of course exploiting and taking whatever they deemed to be valuable to them, the riches and wealth. I want to share with you one other thing real quickly, and then we'll open it up. That one of the things that makes my research pretty darn unique is that I have actually taken the time to go through the Latin and English versions of the Vatican documents. And it's kind of a funny, quick little story about how I managed to figure out where those documents were. Probably if I was a better researcher, I would have just found out. But I was trying to decide where in the heck could I find the actual documents, because I had read snippets. And then I thought, well, they're Catholic documents. Why not call Catholic University? And this is long before cell phones and that sort of thing. So I did. I called the library at Catholic University, and I talked to a guy named well, Mr. Gilson, anyway. And so he said, well, call back in a couple of hours, I'll see what I can find. And I managed to find from him that these documents are published in a book called European Treaties Bearing on the History of the United States and Its Dependencies to 1648. It's on Google Books. You can go to Google Books, and right now you could do it on your phone and type in European Treaties Bearing on the History of, hit enter, and there you are. They're right there. But you have to take the time to actually go through that. Most people find that rather boring. But one of the things that I did figure out is this domination patterning that I had already understood, that I was able to make it much more specific. And I'll just share with you one line from one of those documents, the Papal Bull of May 3rd, 1493, one of which I was able to see the original of at the Archives of the Indies in Seville, Spain in 2013. Ironically, on the very day that it had been issued, my friend Sharon Venn and Dr. Deborah Harry and I got to see two of the original documents written on vellum parchment with octopus ink on the actual day when it was issued. Just kind of one of those weird cosmic coincidences, I guess. But the line is this: sub actuali dominio temporali alicorum dominorum Christianorum constitute non essent. And what that means is lands not constituted or established under the domination of any Christian dominators. And there's another line that says, we trust in him or have confidence in him, confidentes. We have confidence in him from whom empires and dominations and all good things proceed. So what we're actually dealing with in terms of those documents and what they are the manifestation of, in terms of what has been manifested on the basis of those documents, is something that very few people in the world truly understand. And that's what we're trying to bring forward to show that's what we don't want, because that's the path to destruction. It's the black road, as Black Elk would have said. The red road, the good red road, is that spiritual way of life through ceremony, through intuition, through the meanings and concepts in our languages, our traditional concepts, which are in a whole different kind of mindset and worldview than the whole idea of Christendom. So I'm sorry to go on a little bit long, but I'd like to, unless you have something else.
So one other thing that I feel passionate about is providing conversations, and there's this quote that says, let's put our minds together and see what kind of life we can make for our children, something like that. Sitting Bull said that. So I also have been in the process of developing a curriculum. Let's look at, some people say decolonize your mind. I think it's important we start to look at decolonizing our life. Because this domination code, I see that this is not just affecting our indigenous nations and peoples for all this time. It's affecting, I just see it as that nobody on this planet is immune to this domination code anymore. On every level, on the body, the mind, the heart, the spirit, purpose, abundance, our relationships, our impact in the world, all of these things are affected. And how can we start to examine what does this domination code really look like and see it in the patterns so that we can begin to identify it. And then the other part that I have started developing is the reverence code, and really looking at that. And I see that that's the common thread that we all share. That's that internal light and that internal spiritual spark that we all have. And exploring what that looks like and coming into a new healing. So I am in the process of developing a curriculum for that. If you'd like more information, you can sign up on our mailing list if you haven't done that, and we can let you know more about that. One other thing that I like to also say is this domination code, reference code, is the idea my dad talks about, domo, the dome that we see over capitals, state buildings, or churches very often, is that representation of the dome, which is the domination over subjugation. But if you flipped it over, it becomes the vessel, and it becomes this sacred offering. You could put the waters of life in there, and that's representing the reverence code, the sacred feminine. And it's a time of coming together with the sacred feminine and sacred masculine, men coming into their hearts even more, and women stepping into our power even more. So I think we should open it up for Q&A though.
Go ahead.
Well,
If you want, I mean, it might be a waste for you to walk, but you can come up to the mic and ask if you like.
thank you. Thanks for your scholarship on this. It's extremely wonderful. Thank you for your work on this. I went to a Jesuit high school in Phoenix, about a quarter mile away from the Phoenix Indian School. And just during our lifetime, you know, our country has fought 3 major wars and killed millions of people. In the Korean War, the Vietnam War, when I was growing up, and now the Persian Gulf. So I'm asking, why don't you join with me in repudiating and denouncing the claim of the United States, or its legitimacy in the first place? Join with me and call for abolishing the United States, and join in the work to create a new constitution and a new country somehow to go forward. And now we are living in a period of peace, and there's an opportunity to do that.
Well, that's a very interesting concept there. You know, the word America is actually ame, which is a Latin term meaning love. It's a command. And rica, riches and wealth. So it's the dream of riches and wealth, the American dream, which is greed. And so the love of riches and wealth, right? And so the thing is that the American dream is to be fulfilled through life, liberty, and the pursuit of Indian land. I think what you're asking is a very important question in terms of the validity of a country founded on documents that had no validity when they got here. In other words, a man from Six Nations, from the Six Nations Reserve, he called me some time ago and gave me some Latin language that's very important. And it basically says, void ab initio nemo dare quod non abit, which means void when initiated. You cannot grant what you don't possess. There are 2 principles that are fundamentally important to every original nation, which the first one is first in time, first in right, and the second one is found in an 1804 Supreme Court ruling written by Chief Justice John Marshall, which says the authority of a nation within its own territory is absolute and exclusive. The reason why they created Johnson versus McIntosh and other types of decisions like that is that they wanted to prevent our nations and peoples from having those 2 principles applied to our nations, because that would be a checkmate against their incoming invasive ideology, right? Because when they brought those documents from Christendom, as soon as they reached the territorial waters of any original nation along any shoreline, those documents were immediately null and void because they had no jurisdiction, no rightful jurisdiction there. Now, you cannot find that kind of thing taught in any law school anywhere in the world. No, you cannot. You will not. So I'm going to stop short of saying I fully endorse what you're saying, but I think that's the basis for a much more in-depth conversation, and I like the direction in which you're going with that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, anybody that wants to ask a question, just come on up so other people can hear you. Come on, ma'am, that's fine. And if you have to go right away, take a look at our websites, originalfreenations.com and ShawnaBlueStar.com.
Hi, thank you so much for your great work. Just continuing on the last note, I'm wondering, is there any sort of movement or idea for the original nations to, once this idea is normalized, into our culture, to declare their independence or something, over their lands? And is there any dialogue on that?
Thank you.
Well, you could say we're affirming that we have an original, free, and independent existence. There's no such thing, in my view, of a right of domination. There's no such thing as a right of domination. And when you say that, somebody could respond and say, yes, there is, and they could give you all kinds of reasons, but then they have to defend domination. Most people don't want to do that. And what they've done to avoid that kind of conundrum is to use the word conquest and conqueror. So they use that instead of domination. Conquest is claiming a victory, and I'm saying there's no victory. We're still in this. That we've gone more than 520 some years now, but we're still in this fight, and this is now on an intellectual and spiritual level, and the stakes are extremely high when you look at things like Fukushima and the continuing effects of the radiation, the death toll of the insect population, the ecological calamity that faces us all, and especially our future generations. There's much, much more to this than meets the eye, and of course the whole issue with climate change as well. But what I said at the Parliament of the World's Religions, the last time it came around in Salt Lake City, is I said, I listened yesterday with great interest to the discussion of climate change, and it occurred to me that to take on climate change without taking on paradigm change would be a grave mistake. And so that's really what we're all about as well.
So is it, in fact, is it actually the fear that by saying, yes, the domination code was wrong, by admitting that, by the Supreme Court admitting that, are they afraid of opening up innumerable suits for the sovereignty, for the reclaiming of what was stolen? And so they feel the need to maintain that so that they can justify maintaining the status quo.
Right. Thank you for that question. Certainly there's fear, and there's something called settled expectations, the doctrine of settled expectations. And if you read my book, Pagans in the Promised Land, which we still have a few copies of, along with the movie, you'll see that I use as a reference, a major reference, Stephen L. Winter, who wrote this wonderful book called A Clearing in the Forest, Law, Life, and Mind. It's about cognitive theory and the relationship to law, legal systems. And I had a conversation with him in which he said, well, there are settled expectations. In other words, you can't disrupt the way in which the society at large has managed to overrun and overtake the traditional territories of our nations. The reason why I say we have an original, free, and independent existence is that it is the starting point, it's the premise, all right? And when you say that, I had two people come to me from the Unitarian Universalist Church after I addressed their annual convention, and they said, what can we do? And I said, well, one thing you can do is go back to your congregation and get a proclamation drafted up which states very specifically that your church is on the traditional territory of whatever nation happens to be from that place. In the first example, it almost tore their entire congregation apart. It became very, very contentious because of the fear factor, okay? And the same thing with the other one. The other one wasn't quite so dramatic, but the other one took years, and finally the board ended up making a unilateral decision to create this wonderful rock monument, and the nation came, and there was this honor and respect. So yeah, there's going to be that fear, certainly on the part of the Supreme Court, and it gets really deep into the fact that the seven major concepts that hold the society together all flip back to domination. So civilization, sovereignty, state, dominion, property, empire, and ascendancy. Every single one of those, if I had the time, I could tell you, okay, property is the first establishment of socially approved physical domination over some part of the natural world. That's in a law textbook by Lance Liebman and Charles Monroe Haar. And all of those, I could do that with all 7 terms. When you have those concepts as basically the building blocks that constitutes the society, holds the society together on that basis, then questioning domination when the society is premised on domination is a big deal. But if you continue to operate on the basis of dehumanization and the destruction of ecological systems, eventually the law of entropy catches up with you, and you have no basis for having any kind of life because of the collapse that will be inevitable. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah, Alan.
Good job. I don't have a question, or I have one comment, and then I want to say something also. One thing is, we don't need to ask anybody rights. We are all sovereign. All of us are two-leggeds and born and breathe the air from this creation. So if we all come together saying we are sovereign as individuals, and we all do that with a loving heart, then that's a way we should approach it, I think. But what I really want to do here is not ask a question, but to give total gratitude to this moment right now. I think I met Steven, I don't even know, 25, 30 years ago, and he was focused on something. I don't know what brain, but he was focused on something. And so what I want to say is we are honoring these 2 people here in a wonderful way. First, I want to just, after I finish speaking, is to honor that. For someone to be humble and to follow his path against all the odds, and to be able to present it here in a church, and to have his daughter speak about a solution, I want to stand up and thank him, and I wish that we all stand up and just acknowledge what he's done here in Eugene, Oregon today. And to realize that there's the past and the future, but what we have now is the present. And right now in the present, we all have choices to make. And what blew me away is we're starting to see this, and we see this cross lit up. So here we are at a point for reconciliation for each one of us. We're all torn in a lot of ways, but if we can move forward and realize at this moment on there's reconciliation, and that we even have a vision of how to be good-hearted, I'm grateful for this day. So thank you very much for all the work you've done. And let's see this end. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you very, very much. I know Bob remembers how intense I was back when I was young. I mean, I met one guy who said he met me, I don't know, 10 years after he had initially met me, and he said he had told my wife, that guy's either going to be dead or in prison or do something remarkable with his life, because he has, he's got a lot of issues, meaning anger, because I did, and it's that anger that has been my fuel. Fortunately, I met elders who helped me to work through that and to use a white flame rather than a red flame that scorches people, right? But I do want to address a couple things with regard to terminology. And for example, the prior lady mentioned something about claims. We don't have claims. They have the claims. They came here with claims. We have an original free and independent existence extending back to the beginning of time. They have claims. All right, so we need to create a I don't know the right way to use it, a Christendom Claims Commission, and then we will preside over it and decide that their claims are frivolous, like they've done to us. But in all seriousness, the idea of claims and reconciliation, that's another one. It sounds good on its face, but if you didn't have a beneficial relationship to start with that needs to be brought back together, if you didn't have conciliation to begin with, what are you redoing? See, so reconciliation is actually a term of Christian theology, and so it's been used in South Africa very effectively and that sort of thing. But what I use is honor and healing, right? Honor and respect and healing. That's what we need. So we do need a coming together on a heartfelt, sincere basis. I just avoid that term, and I also avoid the term apology. I mean forgiveness, not apology, forgiveness. Forgiveness is a much more complicated, longer-term conversation as well, because for me anyway, it's like, oh yeah, I forgive and forget and all that sort of thing. Well then, thanks very much, see you later. There's no taking of responsibility. So these are things that none of this should be rushed into. We should take the time necessary to come together in a very meaningful, heartfelt, spiritual manner to figure out how do human beings effectively communicate across cultures and do so on a healing basis. Mark?
Again, thank you. 1992 was an interesting year. You referenced that interview where I had not been employed by Lane Community College as of yet, so I was freelance. And in this very church that year, the Institute for African American Mobilization, which is a 4-day substance abuse prevention institute, was held in this church. And out of that came rites of passage and a number of other programs in terms of saying, okay, you need to reevaluate the culture of domination that we're born into and discover an original version of yourself, whatever that is. So a couple of things intrigued me. The doctrine of reverence you talked about, the reference code, yes, and the 7 principles that Virgil talked about, 7 laws that Virgil talked about, and the statement by Tecumseh. Because one of the things, for me as a liberation theologist, black liberation theologist, which means Christianity is an African religion. Yeshua led no armies, killed no one, was killed by people speaking Latin, who then hijacked his religion for purposes of domination. So to return to an Aramaic-based reverence, which reverenced not only the land, not only the sacred feminine, but a certain worldview of a Christendom that is not based on conquest. I mean, so when you talk about Christendom and you talk about, oh, well, that's a European context, yeah, Christianity is not originally European. So when they talk about Saracens, they are talking about black Islamic, not only Islamic people, but black Christians. That's the code for that. So there's racism in there. So to actively embody the antithesis of that, to embrace humanity and not only all living things, and have reverence for the spirit that unites things and actively do that. I mean, I'm an addictions worker, so I don't have to necessarily be addicted or be mentally ill to deal with people who are mentally ill. And I think a lot of times when people are disconnected from their heart, you know, that's the start of mental illness. So a reverence would be a good place to start.
Virgil said this one thing to me. One time he said, they cut you off from your heart, stick you in your head, and manipulate you out of a book. I thought, wow, that's a formula. Now I want to be respectful of the time of the church here, and we have a few more people. How are we doing on time, folks? is 9 o'clock a hard deadline? A couple minutes over? Okay, so we're going to have to start wrapping it up here. If we could just kind of quickly move through these next few comments or questions, that'd be great.
How can we work together when men sexualize dominance of women?
I see this also as really understanding what this domination code is. And I mentioned this is a time of men coming into their hearts even more and women coming into our power even more. One thing that I see, this is a personal vulnerable share, I wasn't going to share this, but so I have been a survivor, I would say, of domestic abuse. Like I've gone through that, I've walked that journey. But through that journey came deep illumination, like, oh my gosh, because I was able to have my dad provide me resources, and there's an incredible book called Why Does He Do That? I can't remember the author, but what I find really amazing is that he was this therapist, and he works with men that are actually court appointed to come to him. And he literally just knows the cycle of domination, dehumanization, violence, and it's almost like textbook. So when I got that book, I was in the midst of it. I was blown away that they all say the same thing. Oh my gosh, that's what my partner just said to me. But this is the same pattern of domination and dehumanization that is being done through nations. One thing that I also was quoting over the weekend when I was at the country fair, I was saying the threefold peace, which Black Elk Oglala Holy Man speaks to, is the first piece is the most important, is when we understand the peace that is connecting us with the universe, our oneness with the universe. And knowing that that is us connecting to the interconnection of all things and all people. Knowing this domination code and really understanding it, and then knowing what this reverence code is and really understanding that piece inside of ourselves through our deeper healing by doing our own process work of what does that look like to decolonize our life and our own shadows and our own wounds. And then the second piece is that piece between two individuals, and then the third piece is the peace between two nations or more nations. But we can't have that without that first, the peace within ourselves. But I see it as really understanding this cycle of violence, how many women or children or this cycle of violence and the domination, dehumanization is affecting so many families and so many women. But what I think is so powerful is to see the messages that I've been getting is all about women coming into our power. And we're seeing it, and we're seeing that women's voices are being heard, and how powerful and beautiful that is, because that's really where healing can begin as well.
I'll keep it brief. This is on my journey of life, this is coming back on the spiral at a higher place. And this is so rich, thank you, in many different ways. An esoteric question. In the film, the opening and the ending, in the film, the beginning background for the beginning and ending of the film, was there any specific thought behind that? Because that represents some very spiritual things to me. So.
Yeah, pardon me, I'm surprised you picked up on that in a way, but it's the showing of the stars, and so that goes into the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota origin story, and the way in which life began as a little stone that exploded and it gave birth to the sun, and the little stone, the we, and then together they are wea, which is the sacred life giver, and also the word for woman. It's much more, but yes, there is that whole cosmological connection in that imagery, and it would take a lot longer to explain that, but thank you for bringing that to light.
Well, thank you. I learned a lot of information tonight. But I guess I personally keep going back to solutions, like not just we're going to do something, we need change, but doing it. Standing up for one another when we see something's wrong. Our youth, they're a mess. They need mentors. When are we going to come together as a community and really just fight what we can fight? They can take a lot from us, but there's certain things that they can't. And we're fighting for these rights. Half of our children don't even know what rights are. Actually adults, they don't even know what the rights are. So, sorry. I don't know, I just think maybe it's time to go back to basics and really come together and try and make the changes we can. So,
Thank you for that. Thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree, and that's something that each community needs to work out as far as how to do that. But one of the things that's intriguing about that at the same time is that the institutional patterns of domination protect the domination. And so, like I could be at Starbucks in Alpine, California, and these massive Border Patrol guys come in there, these ICE people, that's not white supremacy, that's just, the Border Patrol. The vast majority of them are these massive white guys. And so on that level, how do you do those changes, right? And then with regard to and I know this is slightly off topic of what you're talking about, but I'm trying to get at the way in which these institutional patterns tend to be locked into place in some kind of institutional sense, right? Which is just a convention, it's an accepted way of doing things, handed down over a period of generations. But the thing is that the way in which these families are being torn away from their children at the border, for example, right? Heartless, the ICE, they call it ICE for a reason, and good acronym. But the thing is that for some people, this is not even a blip on their emotional radar. And if you have sociopathic and psychopathic types of people in key positions, or other types of maladies, psychological dysfunction and so forth, it becomes very problematic of how we actually do that. So I think part of it is coming together in smaller groups on the basis of what does it mean to truly communicate on a whole different basis, and then practicing that, working at that. Because I'm surprised that human beings communicate even as well as they do. It's very messy. There's a lot of problems with cross-cultural communication, the jumping to conclusions, silent assumptions that aren't expressed, and then people wondering why they're missing each other. And so there's a lot to it. I want to very much thank the church again and all of the community organizations that sponsored this event. I thank you all for coming. So here's the lyric. We are the Turtle Island nations, praying for all our relations, entirely free originally, forever that way we shall rightfully be, rejecting claimed discovery. They say they discovered our lands and our lives. We all know that's nothing but lies, with a colonial design to dehumanize. You can't discover another nation's home with permission from a pope in Rome and rightfully impose a Capitol dome. Kings, queens, potentates, bearing symbols of church and state, claimed a right to dominate. Their ancestors sailed under color of God, divine right to take that was nothing but fraud. We're sustained by our spirituality and our abiding reality. So they've tried to destroy our sacred sites and ceremonial places, but we've held tight. They're never going to erase us from this blue orb of day and night with living waters and sunlight. We pray for all the elements of life. We are the Turtle Island nations, praying for all our relations, entirely free originally, forever that way we shall rightfully be, rejecting assumed superiority. We know water is life for everyone. Decolonize your life. One issue.